Welcome to InspiredInsider.com. Listen in this interview how Mario perfected the 15-hour work week and how he talks about how money was great, lifestyle was great, but he just wasn't happy and why. Also, listen to the big mistake he made with hiring and how it almost tore the team apart and how it relates to a pig farm. He also learned a huge lesson from successful entrepreneurs, and we applied it to his cross-country road trip for IdeaMensch, how much of an impact it made. That and much more. Jeremy Weisz here. We're here with Mario. Mario, a little bit about him. He's the Assistant Vice President of Marketing for the entire University at Montana. He teaches marketing. He's also the founder of IdeaMensch, where they have featured text interviews with people such as Seth Godin, Craig Newmark, Daniel Pink, and many more. They've done over 1,400 interviews on the site. It's amazing. And last year they did a 48-state road trip and did an event in every state, and I had the pleasure of going to one in Chicago. Thanks, Mario, for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeremy.
I always like to include a fun fact, and a fun fact about Mario is he's been playing the same computer game since age 9. Tell us about that for a second.
Yeah. I grew up in Germany, and I played this computer game, which is now called Football Manager. At some point, I think it was called Champions Manager or something like that. Since I'm literally 9 years old, I started playing it on like my Amiga 500, and I'm 32 years old now, and to this day I do not have the self-control to stop like playing the game and to like not turn it on at all times. So after every time I play, I have to uninstall it because it takes a couple hours to reinstall it. And if I don't do that, then like I'll go home and I'll play it every night.
Wow.
So like I literally like I allow myself to play it like once a week, and then when I get done, I have to uninstall it. Like I have no self-control when it comes to that stupid computer game.
People always get hyped up. I love getting excited about the fun fact. So, you're a great person to talk about, and we're going to talk about top advice from founders. And we often learn our most valuable lessons that allow us to grow and improve when we make mistakes and have challenges. And it's even better to learn from someone else's pitfalls. So we want to hear from you the big lessons you learned, some challenges, roadblocks, and mistakes that we should learn from you. And the first one, Mario, I want you to talk a little bit about what was a big roadblock or challenge that you faced and how you overcame it.
Well, so my background is actually I spent the last 10 years. I'll take a step back. So I'm originally from Germany. I came here when I was 16, and I went to college at the University of Montana, which made a huge impact on me. And then I went on and I started a career in advertising. And I ran digital strategy units for ad agencies on the West Coast. So I basically ran the like online marketing, development, etc. for some pretty large clients. And I got pretty good at it. So over time, what I ended up doing is I basically perfected the 4-hour work week. Now, it wasn't a 4-hour work week, but it was more like a 15-hour work week. So, at some point I was literally sitting on a beach in Turkey and, working for an American ad agency, running, corporate Fortune 500 clients in the US and working, like I said, not 4 hours a week, but I got it down to like 15, 20 hours a week pretty easily, wherever I wanted to be. Now, the problem with that was that
I don't see a problem with that right now, but go ahead.
You're right. So that, it worked from the lifestyle was great, the money was great, but I didn't make an impact. And, I wasn't happy with the impact when you work for a large brand and, you get more people to watch a certain TV show, you get more people to, take out a student loan or buy a credit card or, buy airline tickets. You don't go home at the end of the day and think to yourself, oh, wow, I really helped the world today, right? So that was always what was lacking for me. which is partially why I started IdeaMensch many years ago, because that to me was, I loved entrepreneurs and I loved learning from entrepreneurs. I loved being around entrepreneurs, so now I was able to make an impact with IdeaMensch for these entrepreneurs by just, and even if it was just a small impact, but I could feel that impact. But my problem in becoming a full-time entrepreneur, like in making that happen, was ultimately that I was too comfortable. And, it's really hard when you have a six-figure salary and you're working, not that much, and there isn't that much stress, and you work with really nice people, and the work in itself was the kind of work that I love doing, but it just I wasn't making the impact. Well, it's hard to give that up, and that, honestly, that's been my biggest challenge.
Yeah. So you didn't feel as fulfilled as you wanted to be. So how did you overcome it? How did you break out of that comfort zone? Because some people are maybe in the same situation. They're in a job, maybe, they don't like it, and it's still that comfortability factor they're trying to break through.
Yeah. Well, so the one thing is I'm really frugal. So I always saved a lot of money. And that's not to say that, like, I got rich, but, I come from a very poor family. So the longer I was able to be frugal and sort of put aside money, at some point that I was never really driven by money, but I always had to make sure that, like, I was able to support myself, and I just never wanted to be poor again. And my parents worked so hard for me to be able to go to college that it was like, I had to make sure that I managed my life and my finances responsibly. And I would say that once I got past sort of a certain stage where I had a certain level of security where I could say, hey, even if I don't make any money for a couple of years, I'll be just fine. Once I got to that point, that helped. The second thing was that the older you get, or at least for me, the older I got, the more the making an impact became important, right? So when you're like 25, 26, and you're buying your first house, you're doing that, it's like, you're hustling to make that paycheck and to establish yourself in your industry. But once I established myself and I had that very secure paycheck, then it was like, that's when I recognized that it wasn't enough. And then the longer I felt that recognition, at some point I said, that's it. Like, I got to go make an impact now.
So it was painful enough for you at that point that you needed to it was more of a priority for you to make an impact and break out of that comfort zone?
Exactly.
So,
ultimately, that's what drove me. It's interesting. That's what drove me to be an entrepreneur. That's what stopped me. Like, I'm not an entrepreneur anymore, right? So it's like, that's what, at some point I learned that that's what drove me. I didn't want to be an entrepreneur because I didn't want to work for other people. I didn't want to be an entrepreneur because I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I felt like that's how I could make an impact. And ultimately, now working at the university that was sort of where I grew up, like that, the place that I carry great, like, passion for in my heart, I get to make an impact again, and I'm perfectly happy.
Yeah. And you're still carrying on the torch of IdeaMensch as well.
Oh, absolutely, and I always will. Yeah. But and that made it easy to, So last year, IdeaMensch made a nice bit of money. It made it very easy to say, you know what, like, I can give the money part up again. Like, I want to make an impact. I can continue to make an impact. So that was nice. I actually like not depending on the business that makes the impact for income. It makes it a lot more fun.
You can make different decisions probably because of that. So what was a big mistake that you've made that we can learn from?
That's a good question.
I know you're talking a little bit about I always ask about the hiring aspect because people always have big mistakes when it comes to that. Do you have one for that?
Yeah, I do. So last year I went on this 48 state road trip, and it was 4 of us, and we all crammed into my Honda Element, and we literally drove across the country and put on like a 10X style event in every single state over a 4 months time period.
It's amazing.
And it's probably a record. Like, I don't think anybody has heard that. I should look that up. I should tell people it's record breaking because I don't think anybody could have done that. But anyways, so in making the decision of who would go on this trip, I made one decision where I sort of fell in love with the talent of the person, even though I knew that the attitude necessarily wasn't right. Like, it felt right professionally, but not personally. And I was like blown away by the talent. So I said, you know what? Like, we'll overcome that personal part, right? Because we need the talent, and ultimately that did not work. And it almost tore us apart. I mean, because we were on this road trip with 4 guys in a Honda Element, and one of those 4 people was in a very bad mood, and then I was in a very bad mood, and I just remember driving through rural Iowa, and on our way to a pig farm where we were staying, and we were in the car, nobody was talking because everybody was afraid that somebody would say something that would make that person mad or upset, and ultimately we had to part ways at that pig farm, and then the trip changed completely from there on out, and we basically all we got real close. I mean, even closer than we were in that Honda Element.
If you could get any closer, right?
Yeah, and we said, you know what, like we're down 1. It doesn't matter. We'll just all work a little extra, and we did it. And it was just so much more fun and so much more gratifying, and that that was a mistake I made where I put talent in over personality and attitude, and
yeah. And
I wouldn't make that again. And that was the other thing. It wasn't necessarily that it was that person that was the wrong person. It was also that person's personality in conjunction with my personality. So my personality has as much fault in that as the other person. And I kind of saw that, but I chose to ignore it because I wanted the talent part, and that was a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, you seem like an easygoing guy. What was it in your personality that you realized may have been conflicting? I'm
very driven. So I like to take on big challenges, and once I take something on, I'm kind of uncompromising in that. Mm-hmm. Especially when you take on something hard, like I believe as a leader, you have to make the hard decisions, and I'm not afraid to make the hard decisions. And ultimately, like I'm not like a hardcore business person, nor am I a hardcore artist, but let's say I'm a business person who is not afraid to make hard decisions. But the other person was an artist, and that intersection between art and commerce,
right.
It's a fine line in general, and it just became so much more like powerful, like in the small Honda Element driving across the country. So that was it. When you do something like we did, you have to make so many decisions, and
on the fly. I mean,
yeah.
You're literally on the fly, because I remember when I saw you guys in Chicago. I mean, you're trying with that many events. It's like you can't plan for every detail.
Well, 3 events a week across 3 states.
Yeah.
So just, and sometimes you were driving 2,000 miles a week. So it was insane.
Yeah. I know you mentioned earlier, also talking about impact and revenue. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how you've handled that?
You mean in terms of like a milestone that?
Yeah.
That,
no, I mean you said that you were kind of interested in, really interested in impact, and you kind of alluded to revenue earlier. What was something you could talk about? Because all of us kind of relate to that, and it's kind of conflicting in our minds sometimes.
Yeah. No. I mean, I learned I learned very early, it's like, and like, so earlier I talked a little bit about like sort of that once you get to that financial comfort level. And I think there's a stat out there that, once you make more than $65,000, like every incremental dollar that you make isn't really going to make you that much happier. Well, that's especially true for me. And so as an entrepreneur, I think that, it's interesting. I recognized early on that for me it was about the impact. That's why I wanted to become an entrepreneur. It wasn't to make enough money. It wasn't to have a better lifestyle. It wasn't to, to do any of those things because I didn't like my boss. Because all those things I had, like I had the lifestyle, I had the income, and I loved my boss, and I even liked what I was doing. But the impact was what was lacking. Anyways, so with IdeaMensch, what I would say is that. And this I don't know the answer for this, but I always put impact first over revenue. And I actually think that if I had put revenue first, maybe I could have made a larger impact. And that's a conundrum right there, right? If I was more driven, so if I look at people who run websites, and sort of the quest for eyeballs and all those things like just never interested me because I was like the purist. I wanted to make an impact, but in retrospect, and I've known this for a couple of years, I think if I was still just driven by money or by revenue or by profit, that maybe I would have made a bigger impact by now. And that's a conundrum. So I'm whenever people tell me like I'll talk to entrepreneurs and they'll talk about, well, I want to do good and I want to make money. I love that. And I wasn't able to fully scale that, but I absolutely admire people who do.
Yeah. What's a big lesson you've learned while running your business?
This is so IdeaMensch started sort of as a side project, right? And like, I sort of prescribed to I read the 4-Hour Work Week and I loved it. And from there on out, like, I sort of like shifted my career a little bit. And, I started building passive streams of income. And, IdeaMensch was certainly one of them. I mean, there were times where, IdeaMensch could make a couple $1,000s a month on autoplay, which was awesome. It's like, it was just like money that got into my bank account every month. And I didn't really have to do anything beyond what I was doing. But it never sort of went beyond that. And when we did that road trip last year, the one thing that I sort of so this is I'll talk about this for a second. This road trip, for one, like my girlfriend and I at the time broke up. So that was like one split, right? But then the other thing that was great about it is that when we left Los Angeles, I was in a different world. And, like all the comforts, all the things that I talk about, sort of where I was like too comfortable, they went away, now, and now it was all about IdeaMensch. And for the first time in my entrepreneurial career, did I go all in. And I mean, that was it. I just did IdeaMensch, like a couple of years before that, I worked in corporate America and I did IdeaMensch and I did an Ironman and, I did like all these things and I had a girlfriend. Anyways, on that road trip, that was the first time in my life where entrepreneurially, I went all in, 100%, no holding back. Like, didn't put myself first, didn't put my health first, didn't put my relationship first, didn't put my steady income first. I went all in as an entrepreneur and it worked. And like the more like we drove, we did these TEDx style events in every state, and probably had like 175 speakers. A lot of events had 5 speakers, some had 3, and that was the one lesson that I learned from other founders, that you got to go all in. Like the successful entrepreneurs who I met, who were and the success, whether it was a software business or an ad agency or Techstars, the CEO of Techstars spoke at one of our events, or a pig farmer, the one thing that they all had in common is as entrepreneurs, they went all in, no holding back, all in. And I would say that, that to me was the biggest lesson, and that was the biggest lesson I learned myself and from others.
Yeah. And it seems like you're especially proud, obviously, of that, finishing that road trip and going on the road trip. What was one story that is one of your favorites from when you were on the trip?
Oh, I mean, four guys in a Honda Element driving across 48 states, and with me as like the founder, hell-bent on the idea that we got to break even on this, right? This can't be like just coming out of my savings account. Like, we have to run this like a business, right? I was going all in as an entrepreneur. The business needed to produce. So I was really proud of the fact that we were profitable. So, we pulled this off and we made money. And the first year where IdeaMensch was fully in business, we generated real revenue. Like, that in a way that was important to me. In terms of stories, I mean, we stayed on a pig farm in Iowa, and so we stayed as we like drove across the country, and that's how, Jeremy, that's how you and I met. But we got to meet all these amazing people, right. And oftentimes they would just be like, "Hey, why don't you guys stay with us?" So we were staying on a pig farm for like 5 days, and Carl Blake, who was a pig farmer, ended up talking at our event in Des Moines. But anyway, so like, I'll give you a background. Carl Blake is a former computer engineer. Incredibly talented, big guy, ponytail, big beard, only wears overalls, right? And he got tired of, like, in like 2000, he was like, oh, .com bust, I got to get out of technology, I'm going to become a pig farmer. And he took sort of this innovative spirit of that he learned in from Silicon Valley and just technology, and applied it to pig farming. So he wanted to breed a better pig. So he bred what's called a Chinese Misha pig with a Russian wild boar. And it's called the Iowa Swabian Hull. And it's just this ugly black pig. But
I wish we had a picture to pull up right now.
Yeah, I mean, Google Carl Blake. He was just on the Colbert Report and the New York Times. But anyway, it's like, we stayed with Carl for probably 6 days on this like old pig farm that was sort of falling apart and pigs everywhere. And mind you, like, if you get like a Russian wild boar weighs like 400 pounds.
Wow.
So he had this Russian wild boar. His name was Hercules. And like, if Hercules had gotten to me, he would have killed me and eaten me. And we spent 5 days on this pig farm, and it was just incredible. It was just like a surreal experience, and there's pigs everywhere, and like Carl Blake's walking around and cussing and shooting guns, and it's just one of those.
So what do you eat when you're there? Do you just eat like strictly pork products, or what?
Oh, we did shoot a pig and roasted it.
Wow.
Yeah, we ate everything. I mean, we didn't just eat pig, but we did eat a lot of pig, and it was good. The thing about his pig is that it's, a lot of American pork has been bred to be lean, and pork traditionally is not lean. So Carl Blake like invented or brought back the fatty pig. So it's very tasty, but anyway, so that that was just, I don't know if that was my favorite moment. My favorite moment, like, I don't know if there was a favorite moment, but that was definitely the most memorable moment, just those 5 days on that pig farm. Yeah. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you that, we started on the West Coast, went up the West Coast, and I knew the West Coast was going to be pretty comfortable because I had lived large parts of the West Coast, and I had friends everywhere. And then I thought the Midwest was just going to kind of kick our butt because we're driving, through the Midwest for like a month and a half, and we didn't know that many people there. But wow, that was probably the favorite part of the whole road trip, was just like the friendliness of the people in the Midwest, and they all came out, and it was just, it was really memorable. And that time, there was also summer. That was sort of the middle of the summer that we were in the Midwest, so it was hot. But I just loved it.
That's great. Now, talking about some of those, milestones, lessons, what's one piece of advice that you'd want to give founders to make sure they know this? And I know you talked a little bit about impact, and when you have different things going on, it's hard to kind of zero in on one. What's a piece of advice you'd give to a founder?
I mean, I would say this. I think that the entrepreneurs and founders who are successful are ultimately the people who are good at prioritizing, right? It's about focusing on what's important and then executing that. And that's very hard because oftentimes the things that you want to execute are the things that are easy, right? It's like, oh yeah, I can do that real quick. And oh, I can do this. And oh, that'll be fun. I'll do that. And, it's like, but those are not necessarily the things that make an impact, that drive your business forward. So I think ultimately as a founder, you need to be able to prioritize the things that are going to make an impact on your business. Oftentimes financially, right? But that's important. And I subscribe something, I call it 3 feeds. So every day when we're on the road, the night before, I would write down 3 things, 3 feeds that I was going to accomplish the next day. And every one of those had to bring the business forward in some way or shape. So they all had to be kind of uncomfortable. Like they weren't necessarily like easy things. They were, it wasn't like, oh, ask this person for a testimonial. It was more like, call this person and try to sell a sponsorship. Call this person and see if we can get free space to host an event. They were all like very, I don't want to say hard. They weren't just tasks.
It gets you out of your comfort zone.
They were feats, exactly. They were real accomplishments, and there was I always just did 3. So not 7, or even though there was probably an unlimited amount of feats that I should have accomplished, I focus on accomplishing 3 feats every day. And as we went on the trip, like as the trip went along, which went on for 4 months, I got better at prioritizing what those 3 feats should be every day. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's something we all ought to learn.
Yeah. Would you remember one that made you especially uncomfortable that you could talk about and how you kind of overcame it? Because I think we do put off those uncomfortable things and do the easy things. What was one for you that was especially uncomfortable?
Oh, selling sponsorships. It's like you go on this road trip, there's, we would sell tickets for like, I wanted people to be able to benefit from this, whether they have money or not. So our tickets were $10 to $15. And if somebody was like, hey, I'd like to come, but I don't have $10 to $15, they can come for free. It's not hard to sell a ticket. What's hard was to sell like $1,000 sponsorship or a $1,500 sponsorship or a $10,000 sponsorship. And everything about that process was hard, from the finding the people who might want to buy sponsorships to companies, to initially reaching out to them, to sending them a proposal, to ultimately following up and closing the deal. All those things were equally hard. But
which was one sponsorship that, or maybe the first sponsorship that you were like, yes, like you got it under your wing?
We sold a national sponsorship, which I can't disclose the amount, but .co, the domain extension, they bought a national sponsorship, and that was one of the first sponsorships that we sold. So we had city sponsorships, which were much less than a national sponsorship, and we actually sold the national sponsorship just about first, and it came through and we didn't know .co before, so it didn't come through a relationship. It came through a cold call by one of our interns, and ultimately it ended up coming together, and that was a huge confidence boost because it just hey, if we can sell the big sponsorship, then we can sell the little ones.
Right. So going from your advice, what's the best advice you've gotten from a mentor for your business that's been most valuable to you?
You know, I started my career working for an ad agency in Seattle and called Wong Duty. And my first boss, it's interesting. Wong Duty, Tracy Wong, Chinese creative director, Pat Duty, Irish account guy, third partner's name, Ben Wiener. And so it was Wong Duty and Wiener. So when he used to cold call, he used to have to say, "Hey, this is Ben Wiener from Wong Duty." But anyway, so
hard to be taken seriously completely.
Yes, absolutely. One of our rules, we actually had philosophies at this ad agency, which didn't just evolve around like how can we be most creative, how can we do the best work, but our main philosophy was the philosophy of relationships first. And what that meant was that no matter what happened, no matter who we dealt with, no matter what we were faced with, the most important thing was the relationship that we had with each other, and that was our core principle. So it was all about how do we treat each other as employees, and the idea was that if we treat each other well as employees, then we're going to do good work together. And if we treat each other well as employees, then we're going to treat our clients well. And anyway, so this idea, this principle of relationships first has never left me. That is the most important thing. And treating people with respect. And I think, if you can use that and use it sort of as a core principle of everything that you do, it's something that you can build out from. I mean, I know you do that with your business. It's the way you treat your employees and the way you interact with people, your patients and potential patients. I think that's so core. It's oftentimes forgotten because, there's all these things about, ship it and, iterate and, scale and make money as quickly as possible. That's great and that's important. I think the most important thing is how we treat each other as humans. And that should be the foundation of a career, of a business. And it's been for me. And that advice came, when I was 21 years old from my boss, and it's never left me.
That's a great one. What's, Mario, I know you have a lot of great stories, and what's something I haven't asked you, or a story you think would be important to talk about when giving advice to founders and entrepreneurs?
I mean, you know what? I'll tell you this. And this is an easy one to say and a hard one to do, but just be fearless. And it's one of those things that is, like I said, it's easy to say, but hard to do. In the example of IdeaMensch, I'd started out by, I interviewed myself, and then I interviewed like 10 of my friends, and then I was probably out of interviews, and then it was really hard to get the next interview, and it was kind of like, well, you know what, like maybe this wasn't such a good idea. And
Right.
and I remember and then I went and, I went out for a beer. I was living in Portland at the time with a good friend of mine, and we were talking, and he's like, why did you start this? And I'm like, because I want to connect to entrepreneurs, like people who I absolutely admire, and it's like, and I want to see if I can make an impact in that world, because I just, it's like, I love the energy and it's important to me. And he's like, well, who do you admire the most? And I'm like, well, probably Seth Godin, because I've loved everything about Seth Godin, and I think he's brilliant, and just his writing, and I at that point I'd already learned so much from him. He's like, well, you should just ask Seth Godin to do an interview. And I'm like, yeah, right. He's going to do, I can't get like my buddy's cousin to do an interview. Seth Godin isn't going to do an interview. And anyways, we had a couple more glasses of beer. And that night I went home and I emailed Seth Godin. And I woke up the next morning, and not only had he replied, and not only had he said yes, he already had gone on the website, found the questions, and answered them,
Wow.
Sent them back to me. And that once I had, it was literally like, I had 10 of my friends, plus Seth Godin. And that was the beginning. Because from there on out, every email I sent to people, it's like, yeah, we've interviewed people like Seth Godin. But the only way that could have happened is that I really overcame my own fears in emailing him, and I would say that the more you can be fearless about the actions you take, you are going to see the impact, and it's going to be big. Overcoming fear is a really hard thing to do. So like I said, it's easy to say be fearless. So be selectively fearless, right? You don't have to be fearless all the time,
Right.
but every once in a while be fearless, and I promise you will be rewarded.
That's a great story. I'm glad I asked that. I have one final question for you, Mario. And before I ask it, I just want you to tell us a little bit more about your business, what you're working on now, and what you're excited about.
Yeah. Basically what happened is I went on this road trip, and, I was loving it. And actually I thought this year I was going to do a big conference, because that is ultimately like how I could have turned IdeaMensch into, a real meaningful financial business if I had done a big conference, because I wasn't going to drive across the country again. That was a little too much work. But anyways, as I was driving across the country, I got a phone call from my alma mater, the University of Montana, and they said, "Hey, we've got this class next semester. It's in marketing analytics, and we think you'd be perfect to teach it. What do you think?" And at that point, it was like, well, and like if you just teach one class, you can't live off that, right? But I thought, well, you know what? That's real interesting. I loved my time in Montana, and everything that I did with IdeaMensch, I could do from Montana. And I love to fly fish, and I go mountain bike all the time. So it's like, I kept thinking like, well, should I move back to Montana? And at some point I made the decision to move back to Montana. And then what happened is I got another phone call like a month later, and we're still on the road. And they, the university was looking basically for somebody to run their marketing. They had never had a VP of marketing. And they said, well, Mario, you should apply for that. And I thought that was a stretch because I'm 32 years old. Most university administrators are 55, 60 years old at that level. And, I only have a bachelor's degree. I never worked in education. So I thought it was a stretch. Long story short, I got the job. And so now I'm back at the University of Montana. We just relaunched our website. We're launching a new brand. And I absolutely love it because, like I said, the one thing I learned over the last few years is that I didn't want to be an entrepreneur because of the money or the lifestyle. I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I wanted to do something that I felt passionate about, and I wanted to make an impact. And now I get to make an impact at the University of Montana, which I feel so passionate about. So truth be told, I teach a class, I run marketing for the university, and then I've actually hired somebody to run the day-to-day business of IdeaMensch just because that was a little much at this point. So it's perfect. I'm really happy, and like I said, that was a hard lesson to learn, that it was about impact for me, right? Because that's not easy to differentiate. Because you're like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, and
Right.
I've been following. I watched the Andrew Warner interviews, on Mixergy, which are just fabulous. But a lot of the people who who are interviewed on there, it's about money and it's about growth, and I love that. Like I love that philosophically, but like once I got into it, I recognized that sort of the money and the growth part of it meant nothing to me. So I'm really happy right now that I was able to somehow end up here, and the reason I was able to end up here is because last year when for the first time in my life I went all in, and that's ultimately what helped get me here.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. And so, Mario, my last question for you is taking a page out of the interviews on IdeaMensch. And so one of the questions you always ask the founders, entrepreneurs is, tell us about your worst job. So I wanted to hear about your worst job and your least fond memory from it.
I mean, I'll tell you two stories. So there's one of them that is what should have been my worst job, and there's one of them that was my worst job. So I cleaned my freshman year when I came here. I was 17 years old, and I'm from Germany, so I wasn't able to take out student loans. We don't have student loans in Germany because it's free to go to college. And but I really wanted to go to school here. I was a high school exchange student in Montana. And my parents, we didn't have a whole lot of money, so it wasn't like we could just pay for it. So I had to work really hard in college. So my freshman year, I cleaned toilets and of a 11-story dormitory. Wow. Which every Saturday and Sunday morning, I worked Saturday and Sunday mornings, and then one weekday I would get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and I would start cleaning toilets until like 3 in the afternoon. And there's few things worse than having to clean a toilet in like 11 floors worth of toilets on a Saturday morning,
on a college campus especially.
Yeah, on a campus in a university building. That should have been my worst job, but it wasn't, because I learned so much, and I actually was really happy at that time, and I was working towards something, and that wasn't my worst job at all. I worked with great people. My worst job was when I graduated college, and I started working in an ad agency in Montana, and my boss at the time ended up leaving, and I was 21 years old, and I was working for like a 24-year-old. I was like an account coordinator working for a junior account executive. And it wasn't that she was a bad boss or anything. It was just that I wasn't learning anything. And when you first get out of school, it's like, it's not just about the money. It's like a part of your education. And my education had stopped. I was just out of school. I wanted to learn. I wanted to get great at something. And I was put in a situation where I couldn't learn. And truth be told, 3 months into it, I walked out. I quit my job, walked out, and ended up moving to Seattle, where I started sort of my real career in advertising. But that was my worst job. And it was my worst job because I wasn't learning anything. Like, I wasn't growing. And I think those are the worst jobs.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Mario, I appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your words of wisdom with over 1,000 interviews you guys have done on IdeaMensch, and you're going to do great things for Montana, so we're lucky to have you. So thanks so much for your time today.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks for doing this. Have a good day. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.